The book of Revelation mirrors the parting of the Red Sea and what happened to the people of Israel after that. The accounts in Exodus are repeated in the end times. As King Solomon wrote, "What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun." Ecclesiastes 1:9. This is an incredibly important point for those who are interested in knowing in advance what the end times will be like and to prepare them. The escape from Egypt by the people of Israel in Exodus is possibly the greatest symbolic picture of what is going to happen in the end times. We have just finished 3 episodes on how the 10 plagues of Egypt were mirrored by the judgments in Revelation and the judgment of the false little g gods. Links are down in the description. Now, we are ready to examine the dramatic escape and the parting of the Red Sea and how the end times will mirror that as well. In fact, it appears the Red Sea crossing is mirrored twice in the future, not just once. This brings up one important warning for those trying to interpret the parallel a little too closely. Although there are several one-for-one comparisons and symbolic replays of the Exodus saga, it doesn't extend into timing. In the future, things will not happen in the same order as they do in the Old Testament. So don't look for foreshadows as a clue to Revelation's timing, or the rapture timing for that matter. An easy way to prove this to yourself is to look at the trumpet judgments. The first trumpet of fire mixed with hail mirrors the 7th plague. So one is first, one is 7th. The second trumpet, where the sea becomes like blood, mirrors the first plague. And the 4th trumpet of darkness of the sun and moon, well, that mirrors the 9th plague. There's no rhyme or reason or order to the comparisons. And as we just said, there are 2 parallels to the Red Sea crossing, one at the midpoint and one at the return of Jesus. We gave it away a little bit, but that's where they are. The original Exodus took place on the shores of the Red Sea. In Exodus 14:1-4, then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the people of Israel to turn back and encamp in front of Pi Hahiroth, between Migdal and the sea, in front of Baal Zephon. You shall encamp facing it by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the people of Israel, they are wandering in the land. The wilderness has shut them in, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and his host, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord." And they did so. There are a couple things in this passage. The first is the purpose of the Exodus. Not only was God protecting Israel, but it was a testimony to all of Egypt. And as we will learn from Rahab 40 years later in Jericho, the peoples of the surrounding nations knew about this event as well. Rahab recounted this to the 2 spies. "For we heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt." Joshua 2:10. So the Exodus was a known fact for a generation after the event in countries hundreds of miles away, as well as in Egypt. In our previous videos in this series, we also spoke of how one of the later Egyptian pharaohs, Akhenaten, set aside the false gods of Egypt and converted to monotheism. We aren't told this was due to the testimony of the Exodus events, that happened a generation before that, but in my mind it likely was. So the Exodus parallels during the 70th week of Daniel likely have the same purpose, to protect Israel, and as a testimony to the people of the Antichrist kingdom and the nations all around. Something to give them that one last chance to come to faith before they're wiped out. Second is the idea of Israel being in the wilderness where Pharaoh thought he could overtake them. In the book of Revelation, here is the parallel account that happens at the midpoint of his 70th week. "And when the dragon," that's Satan, "saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle," and we're going to explain what that might be in just a second, so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness, to the place where she is nourished for time and times and half a time. Revelation 12:13-14. So this tells us when it happens, at the very beginning of the period of time, times, and half a time, the beginning of what will become known as the Great Tribulation. This event is the same event as the flight of those in Judea that Jesus instructed in Matthew 24:15-21. After the abomination of desolation, the sitting of the Antichrist in the holy place, and that holy place likely is the new temple that will be built there, Jesus instructs those in Judea to flee to the mountains. We discussed this in a recent video on Petra, the town carved out of stone in Jordan. According to the book of Daniel, the Antichrist doesn't have control of Jordan, so it makes complete sense that Israel would flee there. We're also told the woman is given 2 wings of a great eagle. Now, some have supposed that this was the United States and United States airliners taking Israel to safety. But what they don't realize is that this quote comes from the Bible, from the Exodus account. In Exodus 19:4, we read God's words to Israel, "You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." So God is comparing himself to the great eagle. The Israelites are born on God's wings, so to speak. In this event, the flight of Israel with God's assistance, like eagle's wings, is pictured in one of the other famous passages in the Bible. "They who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." Isaiah 40:31. This is a picture of Israel running from the Antichrist and miraculously not becoming tired. Now, it's going to be very easy for the Israelites to become tired and for you and I to become tired as well. We need a way to renew our strength. That's one of the reasons why our ministry, Last Days Overcomers, are holding conferences in Cincinnati on June 10th, in Springdale, Arkansas on July 29th, and in Minneapolis on August 26th. And looks like we're going to be going to Texas in September, although that one's not finalized yet. If you're interested in learning how to renew your strength to get ready for the last days, there's a link down in the description that'll take you where you can get tickets to these events. And I'd love to see you there. Now, getting back to Israel and their flight, Satan causes the Antichrist to pursue Israel. The serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman to sweep her away with a flood. But the earth came to the help of the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon poured from his mouth. Revelation 12:15-16. First, I think we need to define what a flood of water is, the kind of flood that pursues the woman. Is it literal water? Or is this passage speaking of something else, maybe a pursuing army? In Daniel 11:10 and 11:22, armies are spoken of as a flood. In Isaiah 59:19, the enemy comes in like a flood. And in Isaiah 28, it speaks of Israel's covenant with the Antichrist and how it is broken and a flood sweeps Israel away. Let's look at the relevant chapter. Hail will sweep away the refuge of lies, and water will overflow the hiding place. Your covenant with death will be annulled, and your agreement with Sheol will not stand. When the overwhelming scourge passes through, then you will be trampled down by it. Isaiah 28:17-18. So this is likely what the flood of Revelation is speaking of, the army of the Antichrist that goes after those who flee. There's also very interesting opposites in these passages between what Revelation is talking about and the original Exodus. In the Old Testament, Israel flees to the Promised Land. In Revelation, they escape out of the Promised Land. In Exodus, they pass through water on dry land. In Revelation, the dry land swallows up the water. I find these opposites fascinating. I'm not sure why God put them in there to be opposites like that, but they're very interesting. So, how does the earth swallow up this pursuing force of the Antichrist? Well, we don't know, but it's likely the same way the earth swallowed up Korah and his followers in the presence of Moses in Numbers 26. Again, this is an Exodus-related account. Numbers 26:10 even uses the same terminology, that the earth opened its mouth and swallowed Korah and his company. So I think we could pretty safely say that the same thing will happen to the Antichrist army, the same way the water swallowed up Pharaoh's army in the Red Sea. In the previous video about Petra, we speculated on where this might happen. We guessed that it would be in the desert road between Israel's Route 1 and the King Abdullah Bridge on the Jordan border. This region is an earthquake zone. The bridge was originally destroyed back in 1927 by an earthquake and rebuilt, so the region is a prime candidate for swallowing up the Antichrist army. It may happen elsewhere, but this is the spot I'm guessing where it happens. And just as God provided food for the Israelites in the wilderness in the first Exodus, he's going to do this for the Israelite remnant in the second. Revelation tells us they're nourished for a time, times and half a time, away from the presence of the serpent. In a parallel passage, in Revelation 12:6, we're told they shall nourish her for 1,260 days. You're going to like this one. Who are the they? Who are the they that do the nourishing? It's a big mystery, since Revelation 12 doesn't tell us directly. In fact, there doesn't appear to be a plural reference anywhere in the passage that would fit. Some have guessed Christians do it. Some have guessed angels, and others have guessed it's ravens, the way Elijah was fed as he ran from Ahab and Jezebel, but the Bible doesn't say. But we have a much, much, much simpler theory. Here's the Revelation passage. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God that they should feed her there 1,260 days. The passage would make so much more sense if it said a place prepared by God that he should feed her there. Now, it has been theorized that Revelation was originally written in Hebrew and translated into Greek. Let's say that's true. The word for God in this passage would likely then have been the word Elohim, which is a plural noun because God is plural: Father, Son, and Spirit. So if this supposition is correct, then the pronoun they that was chosen would have been the one that grammatically agreed with Elohim and came out of that Hebrew version. Elohim, after all, is a plural noun, so if they would have chosen a plural pronoun, it would read, a place prepared by Elohim that they should feed her there. This is just one more piece of evidence to me that Revelation was written in Hebrew originally. We have a series of videos coming up on the Hebrew version of Revelation, for which the texts have been found in the Vatican archives. It is going to be a very interesting video series, but we'll have to wait for that for just a bit. So the mystery of the they, in our opinion, is a grammatical one. It appears it is not a mystery, but rather a mystery that's based in translation. It's God who provides the manna or other nourishment for the fleeing Israelite remnant, just like it was God who provided manna in the first Exodus. Good question here would be, will it be manna again in the tribulation period? Well, who knows? I'd like to think it will be, because that would make perfect parallel sense. But that's not necessarily true, and we've seen that a lot of things are opposite between Revelation and Exodus. So it could be any kind of nourishment. It also could be a spiritual nourishment, because this remnant will mostly come to faith when Jesus returns, and spiritual nourishment, as they're waiting for that day to come, would make perfect sense. Perhaps there's some Christians in among that group that flees to the mountains. Think about it. Jesus said all those in Judea should flee to the mountains. That would be Jews, but also maybe some Messianic Christians. And maybe these Christians provide the Jews with a reason to put their faith in Jesus. It's just an idea, but it's one I've thought about for a long time. So that's the first Exodus parallel. A second Exodus parallel in the book of Revelation occurs after the sixth seal. We read about this one in Zechariah. The Lord will go forth and fight against the nations as he fights on the day of battle. And in that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from east to west, making a very large valley. Half the mountain shall move toward the north, and half towards the south. Then you shall flee through my mountain valley. The mountain valley shall reach to Azal, and you shall flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah the king of Judah. Zechariah 14:4-5. Here, those still living in Jerusalem will escape through a mountain valley formed when the Mount of Olives splits with an earthquake, when Jesus' feet touch it. This is yet another opposite. In the Exodus, they escaped through a valley in the Red Sea with water on both sides. Here, there will be land on both sides. This earthquake is also described in Amos 1:1. His vision, Amos's vision, happened 2 years before that earthquake. Zechariah is 200 years later when he was writing, and they are still remembering Uzziah's earthquake. So it must have been a very memorable and damaging earthquake. Now, Zechariah timestamps when this occurs, because I bet you're thinking to yourself, I always heard that happened right before Armageddon when Jesus comes back with the saints and his angels. But that's not the case. Here's what Zechariah says. Then the Lord my God will come, and all the holy ones with him. And that's a quote from the book of Enoch. On that day, there will be neither sunlight nor cold, frosty darkness. It will be a unique day, a day known only to the Lord, with no distinction between day or night. When evening comes, there will be light. Zechariah 14:5-6. Now we need to take this passage apart piece by piece. Let's start with the Enoch quote. Zechariah quotes Enoch 1:9, which is also quoted by Jude in the New Testament, where Jesus comes with 10,000 of his holy ones. But that isn't the only verse in Enoch that the Bible quotes. Psalm 97:5 says mountains will melt like wax before the Lord. That also comes from Enoch 1. Verse 6. Is this splitting of the Mount of Olives part of that melting? Likely it is. We then see that it is a day without sunlight or darkness. That's a very unusual phrase. We know Jesus returns after the sixth seal, when the sun, moon, and stars go dark. And a better translation of Zechariah, the literal Hebrew in this passage, says the lights diminish, which is literally what happens on that day. The sun, moon, and stars go dark. They diminish. So this is the coming of Jesus on the clouds after the sixth seal. Zechariah says it's only a day, but the Lord knows. Another very interesting phrase. That's exactly what Jesus said about it. Is a day and hour that no man knows, just the Father only. And then the most unusual phrase of all. When evening comes, there will be light. This could mean several things, but most likely, it's the brilliant Shekinah glory of Jesus' coming. Jesus is going to light up the sky. At evening, there will be light. So unlike what most think, the Mount of Olives splits upon Jesus' return at the sixth seal, not when he returns to fight Armageddon. Jesus' feet, then, must touch down on the earth at that moment, as Zechariah 14 tells us. But where does Jesus go from there? What happens next? The next time we see Jesus, he is leaving Edom and Basra with stained garments. Click right here to keep watching and discover what his garments dipped in blood mean in terms of prophecy. the order of events in Revelation, and when the rapture occurs, according to this amazing passage. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.